destroy a criminal empire that has ruled a city longer than most governments have held power. Just before dawn, Los Angeles trembled under the roar of rotor blades. Helicopters swept across the San Pedro skyline, their spotlights slicing through the marine haze. Streets once silent under gang rule now echoed with the metallic crash of battering rams and the shouted commands of armored agents. In that single hour, a fortress built on fear began to collapse. The operation was codenamed San Pedro's Silence. It wasn't just another raid, it was the federal government's most precise strike yet against the Mexican Mafia's network of street armies. At 4:00 a.m., teams from the FBI, DEA, LAPD, Homeland Security Investigations, and the California Department of Justice moved as one, 16 federal warrants, 14 arrests, 0 casualties. By sunrise, the Rancho San Pedro gang's leadership, once considered untouchable, was gone. For decades, San Pedro's residents had lived under a shadow state and underground government that collected taxes, enforced laws, and punished defiance. Drug money flowed through auto shops, housing blocks, and shipping docks. Extortion became the cost of survival. It was an empire of fear, said one federal prosecutor. Now we've taken its crown. Yet beneath the triumph lies a deeper question. Has America just won a battle or opened a new war? The takedown marks the sharp edge of President Trump's defend forward at home doctrine, an extension of his international security policy now aimed inward at domestic cartels. Inspired by the same offensive strategy used against Iranian-backed militias and Chinese cyber networks, the doctrine empowers federal agencies to strike first, dismantle logistics before violence erupts, and treat transnational gangs as hybrid warfare threats. In global terms, the strategy mirrors NATO's proactive posture against Russian networks in Ukraine and Israel's deep penetration raids into Gaza's tunnel systems. The new philosophy, don't wait for the attack, eradicate its source. The Mexican Mafia in that sense became a test case for this evolving form of urban counterinsurgency. But the question lingers, where is the line between protection and power? When armored vehicles roll through American neighborhoods, are they symbols of safety or signs of something more profound? The militarization of domestic peace. As the morning sun rose over the Pacific, the air smelled of salt and gun oil. Onlookers filmed from their balconies, unsure whether to cheer or pray. The silence that followed was chilling, a silence born not from fear, but from shock. For the first time in 40 years, San Pedro's streets belong to no one. The next move, experts warn, will decide whether this operation becomes a blueprint for national security or a symbol of federal overreach. And as Washington eyes the cartels that still operate from Mexico to Chicago, the real question emerges: can America defend its freedom without turning its homeland into a battlefield? Behind the closed doors of California's highest security prisons, a quiet empire had been ruling the streets for decades. The Mexican Mafia, known among inmates as La M, no longer needed guns to control Los Angeles. Orders whispered through prison walls could dictate murders, set prices for narcotics, and determine who lived or died in neighborhoods hundreds of miles away. What began as a brotherhood of convicts in the 1950s had evolved into a corporate shadow state operating with ruthless efficiency. Federal analysts describe it as an invisible command economy. Each gang on the outside, from Rancho San Pedro to Wilmington, functioned as a regional franchise. Each paid a street tax funneling money back to imprisoned bosses who ran operations like CEOs behind bars. Ledgers recovered during the raids revealed a web of bank accounts, cryptocurrency transfers, and coded communication spanning both sides of the border. The FBI called it the financial nervous system of the Mexican Mafia. One line item in a seized ledger read $14,700, harbor tax February. Another shipment 32 lbs meth via Ensenada route. These weren't random numbers, they were the DNA of a multi-million-dollar transnational machine. According to Reuters, this system mirrors cartel structures seen in Colombia and Mexico, decentralized, resilient, and built to survive leadership decapitations. Much like Wagner's mercenary networks in Russia or Hezbollah's financial web in Lebanon, La M had mastered hybrid governance, using fear and money to rule where the state could not. But the question now facing U.S. intelligence is not how deep it runs, it's how far it spreads. As DW reports, similar patterns have been detected in Chicago, Houston, and even Phoenix, where smaller gangs pay tribute to California's prison elite. The Mexican Mafia has become not just a criminal network, but a model for cartel franchising across America. This convergence of domestic and transnational crime has reshaped federal strategy. Under Trump's 2025 directive, the Justice Department and Homeland Security treat organized gangs as extensions of foreign hostile entities. The new mandate: if it funds a cartel, it's a national security threat. That framing echoes Washington's global approach to hybrid warfare, whether Russian cyber attacks in Eastern Europe or Iran's proxy militias in Syria. Defense news analysts note the similarities: covert funding, decentralized cells, plausible deniability. The battlefield has changed, but the tactics are the same. Meanwhile, the human toll in San Pedro is incalculable. Entire generations grew up under invisible taxation for silence and normalized violence. One retired LAPD sergeant compared the situation to post-war Mosul. It's not just about arresting criminals, it's about deprogramming a city from decades of fear. Internationally, experts from The Guardian warn that what's unfolding in Los Angeles may foreshadow future conflicts where organized crime merges with global politics and urban centers become the new front lines of asymmetric war. Now, as the federal government tears down this empire brick by brick, a haunting question rises from the ashes of San Pedro. Can a nation ever truly reclaim freedom once its own streets have learned to live under occupation? When investigators opened the seized ledgers and encrypted phones, they didn't find chaos, they found organization. Rows of names, dates, coded symbols, and dollar signs. Rancho San Pedro was not a gang in the traditional sense. It was a corporation. Federal analysts at the Justice Department described it as a six-tier syndicate built on discipline, hierarchy, and fear. Each clique had a captain. Each captain reported to an enforcer. Every transaction, from a $20 bag of meth to a $50,000 shipment of fentanyl, was recorded and taxed. The gang even maintained its own compliance system, violent audits to ensure loyalty. According to Jane's Defense Weekly, this mirrored cartel logistics more than street crime. Sinaloa's networks in Mexico had long operated on franchise models. Now that same business structure had taken root in the US. The Rancho San Pedro organization served as the West Coast logistics arm of the Sinaloa cartel, handling product storage, smuggling routes, and distribution hubs. Every kilo sold in Los Angeles meant dollars flowing back to cartel bosses in Culiacan and imprisoned La M leaders in Pelican Bay. It was global capitalism in its darkest form. Agents discovered that Rancho San Pedro was moving enough methamphetamine, fentanyl, cocaine, and heroin annually to fuel an entire metropolitan market. BBC News confirmed that similar synthetic drug pipelines have emerged along the US-Mexico border, facilitated by encrypted messaging and untraceable cryptocurrencies. The operation's financial network included shell auto shops, small trucking companies, and cash-based laundromats. But beneath the money was ideology. The gang treated obedience as law. Murders were authorized through coded calls from inside state prisons, green lights on disloyal members or rival crews. Each act of violence served the same purpose: maintaining a monopoly of fear. When federal agents presented their findings to Washington, one advisor to the National Security Council described Rancho San Pedro as a hybrid insurgency embedded inside US territory. It was the perfect enemy: decentralized, adaptable, and economically self-sustaining. That label changed everything. The Pentagon's Domestic Intelligence Wing began coordinating with Homeland Security under the Defend Forward framework originally designed for overseas cyber and counter-terror operations. The logic was clear: if America can neutralize threats abroad before they reach its borders, why not apply that doctrine to the cartels that have already crossed them? From Moscow to Tehran, the model was familiar: state adversaries funding proxy forces to destabilize rivals. Now, for the first time, that playbook was being rewritten on US soil. Analysts at Defense News compared the crackdown to Ukraine's counteroffensive tactics, preemptive strikes to dismantle command networks before they can regroup. But even as the raids intensified, a chilling realization emerged. These networks were Hydra-headed. Cut off one leader, another rose within weeks. Arrest one cell, 3 more adapted online. And so, the war entered a new phase: economic warfare. Treasury and FBI task forces began tracing wire transfers, crypto wallets, and front businesses. Each dollar of cartel profit became a target. Yet beyond the figures and tactics lies the deeper tension haunting this moment. Can a democracy wage total war on organized crime without blurring the line between justice and control? As the US steps into this uncharted battlefield where Wall Street and war zones overlap, the nation faces its own mirror image. How different is a criminal empire from a corporate one when both can buy silence, loyalty, and power? The sun hadn't yet cleared the Pacific when San Pedro erupted in light and thunder. Armored Bearcats roared down Pacific Avenue. Helicopters hovered low enough to rattle windows. For residents who had spent decades trapped under gang law, it felt like a scene from a war film, only this time the enemy wasn't invading from abroad. It was being rooted out from within. At 4:03 a.m., tactical teams breached the first target house. Shouts echoed through the narrow streets, "FBI, get down," followed by the crack of battering rams splitting steel doors. Within minutes, 16 coordinated raids unfolded across Los Angeles County. By dawn, 14 suspects, all ranking members of Rancho San Pedro, were in custody. Their phones seized, their communication lines severed, their reign finished. Inside one home, agents found an AK-47 hidden beneath a child's bed. In another, a handwritten ledger listing tribute payments sent to incarcerated Mexican mafia bosses. On the table lay bagged fentanyl tablets stamped with counterfeit pharmaceutical markings, deadly imitations of OxyContin meant for Los Angeles streets. The scale of seizure stunned even veteran officers. Dozens of firearms, hundreds of thousands in cash, pounds of methamphetamine, heroin, and cocaine. Each evidence tag told a fragment of the same story, a decades-old criminal enterprise collapsing under its own weight. From the air, the harbor shimmered under early light, an industrial calm that belied the battle below. Reporters from Reuters described it as the most complex multi-agency strike in California since 9/11. For the FBI's Los Angeles field office, it was not just a success. It was proof that federal unity could rewrite the balance of power in urban warfare. As dawn gave way to daylight, the tone shifted. Along Pacific Avenue, mothers stepped onto porches clutching their children. Some wept, others applauded. One woman told The Guardian, "For the first time, I heard silence. Not gunfire, not shouting, just silence." But silence can be deceiving. Every operation has a cost, and beneath the triumph lies unease. The armored convoys, the black-suited agents, the blocked intersections, all symbols of control, but also reminders of fragility. In Israel, similar imagery plays out in counterinsurgency raids across Jenin. In Ukraine, special units sweep cities after Russian missile strikes. In China, state security patrols enforce harmony with the same precision. The global pattern is clear. Where threats hide in shadows, democracies reach for strength that sometimes resembles the very power they fight. LAPD Chief Jim McDonnell called the mission a liberation, yet analysts from DW and Al Jazeera warned that prolonged militarization risks normalizing emergency measures. Every success brings temptation. If this level of force worked once, why not again and again? Still on that morning, the symbolism mattered. A city long ruled by extortionists and fear had witnessed the fall of its invisible empire. For residents of San Pedro, the helicopters above weren't instruments of oppression. They were, for a fleeting moment, the sound of freedom. As the last suspects were transported downtown, a federal agent remarked quietly to reporters, "This isn't the end, it's the first domino." The question that follows haunts both policymakers and citizens alike. Can the silence that follows a raid ever become peace, or will it always echo with the memory of war? By midday, the streets of San Pedro looked almost surreal, quiet, sunlit, and unfamiliar. Police tape fluttered in the ocean breeze as federal vans rolled away, leaving behind a community trying to remember what peace felt like. For decades, the Rancho San Pedro gang had been the city's invisible government. Now that government had fallen, but the shockwaves were only beginning. At the FBI's downtown command center, analysts watched the aftermath unfold like an economic collapse. Dozens of smaller gangs once shielded under Rancho's protection began to disband. Dealers abandoned their corners. Enforcers vanished overnight. "We took the oxygen out of their economy," said one LAPD lieutenant. "No taxes, no orders, no product. The system suffocates." But the victory came with a warning. As Reuters reported, dismantling a power structure doesn't erase its roots, it exposes them. Without Rancho's iron rule, power vacuums began forming across Los Angeles County. Factions loyal to the Sinaloa cartel and even rival groups like Jalisco New Generation were already moving to claim the territory. The U.S. Department of Justice, citing data shared with BBC News, estimated that the region's narcotics market generated nearly $1.2 billion annually. That level of profit doesn't disappear, it migrates. The next war, officials cautioned, will not be fought in alleys, but in ledgers where cryptocurrency trails and money laundering fronts replace gunfire. Meanwhile, the human impact was profound. Residents who had once paid protection rent now began speaking openly to police. Shopkeepers reopened stores long boarded up. Children played on streets where gunshots once dictated curfews. Local clergy held vigils calling the operation a cleansing storm. And yet freedom brings new fear. With the gang's hierarchy decapitated, retribution became unpredictable. Anonymous threats appeared on social media. A community that had learned to live under tyranny now faced the uncertainty of transition, a fragile peace built on broken silence. Experts at DW drew parallels with post-occupation cities in eastern Ukraine. Once the occupying force is gone, society must relearn trust. San Pedro, they noted, is undergoing a similar rebirth caught between liberation and lawlessness. At the national level, the success of Operation San Pedro's silence energized Washington. President Trump, in a statement from the Oval Office, declared the operation a model for the new era of consequence-based enforcement, echoing his defend forward at home strategy. Federal funding surged for task forces targeting cartel-linked gangs from Texas to Nevada. But abroad, allies were watching closely. Israel's defense ministry praised the surgical precision of the raid, comparing it to its own counterterrorism sweeps in the West Bank. In contrast, China's foreign ministry called it a symptom of America's internal instability. Russia's state media used it to claim that American democracy now governs itself with martial law. The symbolism was global, a superpower turning its counterinsurgency doctrines inward. Al Jazeera observed that the US was now exporting a message as much as a policy that transnational crime will be treated as a form of warfare. Back in Los Angeles, the question remained deeply personal. Could the same federal hand that brought order also bring reconstruction? Will the families who watched their streets burn under gang rule now find justice in the institutions that once felt absent? The victory is real, but as history has shown, from Baghdad to Kyiv, from Medellin to Los Angeles, the day after liberation is when the hardest battles begin. As dust settled over the Los Angeles harbor, the last of the federal convoys rolled away from San Pedro. Floodlights dimmed, leaving a city bathed in amber silence. To some it was peace. To others it was the calm before a new kind of storm. For the FBI, DEA, and LAPD, the takedown was complete. For the White House, it was just the beginning. In Washington, President Donald Trump addressed the nation, flanked by the Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security. This is what Defend Forward at Home looks like he declared. America will no longer wait for threats to reach our borders. We will strike them before they strike us, whether they wear uniforms, gang colors, or suits. The statement marked a defining moment, the transformation of America's domestic security doctrine into an extension of its global military posture. Under the new order, transnational cartels, cybercrime rings, and human trafficking syndicates are treated not as criminal networks, but as non-state combatants. It is law enforcement crossed with counterterrorism, the merging of two worlds that were once carefully separated by law. From Defense News and The Guardian came the same assessment. Washington has redrawn the battlefield map. The same tools used against Russian hackers, Iranian proxies, and Chinese espionage cells are now being applied in American cities. AI-driven surveillance grids, predictive analytics, and cross-agency kinetic task forces. The line between foreign war and domestic policing has never been thinner. Critics warn of overreach. Civil liberties groups argue that in the pursuit of absolute security, the nation risks eroding the freedoms it was built to protect. Al Jazeera compared the trend to the securitization of Latin America in the 1980s, where counter-cartel operations blurred into political suppression. Yet supporters say the threat has changed. The cartels are no longer just smugglers. They are geopolitical actors funding wars, influencing economies, and infiltrating supply chains. Strategically, the United States is not alone. Israel's long-standing policy of preemptive defense, Ukraine's resistance networks under constant hybrid assault, and Taiwan's defensive cyber doctrine all echo the same principle. Survival now depends on anticipation, not reaction. In this sense, Los Angeles became both a proving ground and a warning, a glimpse of the future of modern governance where sovereignty is enforced through data drones and decisive strikes. Inside Los Angeles, residents are beginning to rebuild. Community leaders, church groups, and veterans associations have joined law enforcement outreach teams determined to turn the silence into stability. But the scars remain. Every empty house, every shuttered corner store, every bullet-riddled wall reminds the city of what was lost and what it took to reclaim it. As night fell, the harbor lights flickered over still waters, a reflection of a country at a crossroads. The victory in San Pedro had shown America's strength, but it also raised a question that would echo from coast to coast. If the nation must fight like an army to feel safe at home, how long before safety itself becomes another form of control? Operation San Pedro's silence recounts one of the most decisive law enforcement actions in U.S. history, a joint FBI, DEA, and LAPD raid that dismantled the Rancho San Pedro gang, a powerful powerful arm of the Mexican Mafia. The operation symbolized the first full application of President Donald Trump's defend forward at home strategy, treating cartel-linked gangs as national security threats. Drawing on global counterinsurgency models, it redefined domestic policing through precision raids, intelligence fusion, and preemptive disruption. The six-part narrative exposes how a neighborhood syndicate evolved into a cartel franchise tied to the Sinaloa network, how law enforcement adapted military doctrines to urban America, and how communities began rebuilding after decades of fear. It also mirrors global conflicts, Ukraine's resilience, Israel's preemptive strikes, and America's confrontation with China's hybrid power. In the end, the story raises a haunting dilemma in the pursuit of absolute security. How far can a democracy go before it begins to mirror the very systems it fights against?